Hello. Thank you everyone for joining us tonight for Structured Echo. It's a digital material dialogue using Samuel Beckett's The Unnamable as a catalyst. We'll be joined by Karl Foster, Kimberly Foster.
Thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
I haven't muted the audio. We'll be joined by Karl Foster, Kimberly Foster and Victoria Mitchell. They probably won't say much about them themselves, so I'd just like to read a quick bio from each. Karl Foster is an artist and lecturer and currently a PhD researcher at University of the Arts London. His practice research focuses on aspects of not knowing in fine art ideology in relationship to the psychoanalytic thinking of Wilfred Bion. Karl is one half of the collaborative partnership Sorehead, along with Kimberly Foster. She is an artist and lecturer, currently undertaking PhD research at Goldsmiths University of London. Her practice research questions the status and necessity of vital materiality and the embodied encounter within the context of art ideology. Kimberly is one half of the collaborative partnership Sorehead as well. Victoria Mitchell, who has been working with them, writes on making embodiment, metaphor and meaning, often in the context of textile culture. She is a research fellow at Norwich University of the Arts. They'll be doing a short introduction now before their piece. I'm hopefully going to smoothly pass over to them. I'll be back at the end to talk a bit more about what we have coming up next in the programme. But for now, please enjoy this.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Just making sure that all the screens are showing. Thank you, Henry, for that introduction. It's always odd to hear somebody introduce you and you have to think, is that who I am? And do I do that? But I think that is who we are and that is what we do. So that's really good to start with. You might be happy to know that you're not really going to see very much of our faces this evening, but you might see our hands and you might see us moving objects. So to begin with, we just want to kind of outline the structure of this event and something of the development that brought us to this stage and why we are here and what it means for us to be working within the kind of context of Zoom. If you have any comments or any thoughts, we look forward to hearing those at the end. The broadband signal may not be entirely reliable for every one of us, so we embrace the instability within the event and feel this adds to the process of knowing and not knowing, which is very much part of our practice. You will see that there are 4 screens, or hopefully you're seeing that there are 4 screens for 3 participants, and this is to balance the visuals within the grid of Zoom. We're using a simple structure this evening for this event, a frame and an anchor for chance and material play, and for us to form something around that. In a sense, following my introduction, you may notice 3 roughly 5-minute sections: object, image and word, followed by a short concluding section. And I'm just going to switch my camera now before I go into the rest of the introduction. So to kind of introduce ourselves in a way, I think it's important to say that we've established a collaborative research practice over the past few years under the title And But. The modus operandi is a form of inquiry negotiated through material play. These unfolding material encounters have intentionally brought the thinking, transactions, catastrophes, utterances, mattering, meaning, and visual verbal dialogue to the forefront of an experimental art practice, hopefully reducing any emphasis on the final product or outcome. Usually, unlike this, we would conduct our meetings around a table in our homes, maybe with a glass of wine, maybe with some crisps. The experience has, as it has for all of us, been changed and transformed by COVID, so that the nano-thin space of the computer screen has become an apparatus through which this material play, can be negotiated anew. Rather than seeing limitations, though, we're seeing this as focusing on a potential. The digital field has become an improvised and continuously transformed theatre space in which the interactions, and in fact intra-actions, of matter, gesture, correspondences, distances, affordances, and intensities are played out. During lockdown, we used Jean-Paul Sartre's nausea as a stimulus for material action, and we selected pages using a random generator online and responded in material form to the text. We were worrying very little about the meaning of the communication. The process was very much about taking pleasure in the words and finding materials that seemed to echo the feelings and mental images they generated. However, on this occasion, we have taken Samuel Beckett's The Unnamable as a disruptive focus for our inquiry and dialogue. Naturally and obviously, we're not intending to set up a critical relationship to the entirety of Beckett's unnamable text. We intend to respond to the wider feel of the text and some randomly found pages. We think that for Beckett, the boundary between certainty and uncertainty is a grey area through which meaning and the meaning of words crawls forward in fits and starts, always temporary, always shifting, and never resolved. For Mikhail Bakhtin, the words live, as it were, on the boundary between its own context and another alien context. In our practice, these boundaries apply not only to words, but also to matter, an intermingling between the mattering of words and the mattering of matter is played out, often through a combined nuance of utterance and gesture. We move in and out of words. We move with and through materials. Failure is expected and permitted. We are all more or less locked up. We put ourselves in Zoom windows to be seen, to see, to hear and be heard. And interestingly, in the 11th century, windows were called wind eyes, eye holes, or eye doors, unglazed holes through which the wind, smoke, light, and the gaze of the eye could pass through. Zoom collects windows in grid form, within a frame or window, within the computer screen. The wind and the smoke cannot pass through. We come together socially through it. We rub shoulders in the rigid grid through touch and through without contamination. Crisis, in a way, has thrust the modernist emblem onto our ways of relating to each other. We inhabit the grid and simultaneously live without it in our real living spaces. In this event, we put a net over Beckett's text, allowing us, in a sense, to look simultaneously at and through it. Perhaps this is a response to being caught up in the net of Beckett's words. It is an interlace of sorts.
I'm locked up. I'm in something. It's not I. That's all I know about that. That is to say, make a place. A little world. It will be round. This time it will be round. It's not certain. Low of ceiling, thick of wall. Why low? Why thick? I don't know. It isn't certain. It remains to be seen. All remains to be seen. A little world. Try and find out what it's like. Try and guess. Put someone in it. Seek someone in it. And what's he like? And how he manages. It won't be, no matter. Perhaps it will. Perhaps it will be my world. Possible coincidence. There won't be windows. We're done with windows.
In a word, like a beast. In one of their words, like such a beast, and that I seek, like such a beast, with my little strength, such a beast, with nothing of its species left but fear and fury. No, the fury is past, nothing but fear, nothing of all its due but fear centrupled, fear of its shadow. No, blind from birth, of sound then, if you like, we'll have that. One must have something, it's a pity, but there it is. Fear of sound, fear of sounds, the sounds of beasts, the sounds of men, sounds in the daytime and sounds at night. That's enough. Fear of sounds, all sounds, more or less fear, all sounds. There's only one, continuous, day and night. What is it? Its steps coming and going, its voices speaking for a moment, its bodies groping their way. It's the air, it's things, it's the air among the things. That's enough that I seek. Like it, no, not like it, like me, in my own way. What am I saying? After my fashion, that I seek. What do I seek now? What it is, it must be that. It can only be that. What it is, what it can be, what can be. What I seek, no, what I hear. Now it comes back to me, all back to me. They say I seek what it is I hear them. Now it comes back to me, what it can possibly be, and where it can possibly come from, since all is silent here, and the walls thick, and how I manage, without feeling an ear on me, or a head, or a body, or a soul, how I manage to do what, how I manage is not clear. Dear, you say it's not clear, something is wanting to make it clear. I'll seek what is wanting to make everything clear. I'm always seeking something, it's starting in the end, and it's only the beginning.
The words are everywhere, inside me, outside me. Well, a minute ago I had no thickness. I hear them, no need to hear them, no need of a head. Impossible to stop them. Impossible to stop. I'm in words, made of words, others' words. What others? The place too. The air, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, all words. The whole world is here with me. I'm the air, the walls, the walled in one, the walled in one. Everything yields, opens, ebbs, flows like flakes. I'm all these flakes, flakes meeting, mingling, falling asunder, falling asunder, falling asunder. Falling asunder, falling asunder.
That's an idea.
Wherever I go, I find me, leave me, go towards me, come from me. A particle of me, retrieved, lost, gone astray.
To heighten my disgust, I'll recite it. This will leave me free to consider how I may best proceed with my own affair, beginning again at the point where I had to interrupt it. Under duress, or through fear, or through ignorance, it will be the last story. I'll try and look as if I was telling it willingly, to keep them quiet in case they should feel like refreshing my memory on the subject of my behaviour above in the island, among my compatriots, contemporaries, and companions in distress. This will leave me free to consider how to set about showing myself forth. No one will be any the wiser. But who are these maniacs let loose on me from on high for what they call my good? Let us first try and throw a little light on that. To tell the truth, no, first the story.
That is typical. I know no more questions and they keep on pouring out of my mouth. I think I know what it is. It's to prevent the discourse from coming to an end, this futile discourse, which is not credited to me and brings me not a syllable nearer silence. But now I am on guard. I shall not answer them any more. I shall not pretend any more to answer them. Perhaps I shall be obliged in order not to peter out.
I'd be a network of fistulae bubbling with the blessed pus of reason. Ha. Huh. Where's the cow? Where's the cow? Have you seen the cow in my window?
The cows are coming back.
They're coming home.
The one with the waggly tail. How much is that doggy in the window? I do hope that dog is for sale. I must take a trip to California and leave my poor sweetheart alone. If he has a dog, he won't be lonesome, and the doggy will have a good home. How much is that doggy in the window? The one with...
There we go. I don't know. I don't know. That's all words. I never wake. All words. There's nothing else. You must go on. That's all I know. They're going to stop. I know that well. I can feel it. They're going to abandon me. It will be the silence for a moment, a good few moments, or it will be mine, the lasting one that didn't last, that still lasts. It will be I. You must go on.
I can't go on. You must go on. I'll go on. You must say words, as long as there are any, until you find me, until they say me. Strange pain, strange sin. You must go on. Perhaps it's done already.
Perhaps they have said me already. Perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story. Before the door that opens on my story, that would surprise me. If it opens, it will be I. It will be the silence. Where I am. I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence, you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
And I think that's where we stop.
We invite we invite.
Oh, and Victoria's disappeared a little bit now. Are you going to make yourself visible now, Karl?
Bye. Can you see me?
I think Victoria's stuck.
I'm just going to paste something in the chat about something that was preoccupying me in particular about the grid and the Zoom grid that we're in. And it was from Paula Burley in our forum. But that may not be relevant here. Well, what she's talking about particularly is how...
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, Karl, you can say about why it was preoccupying you.
Paula Burley in our forum said that the grid, the modernist grid, has now been reinvested with the messy relational material of daily life, acting as our digital bar, workplace, classroom and social commons. And she also said there was a kind of word of caution in there, is that the structure and logic of the grid is repetition, a system that encourages conformity while muting difference. And our approach was that we're in a grid, and can we find a way of trying to resist or think differently about its limitations without being bleak, I think.
Yeah, I think it was kind of important that we were interested in the materiality of it and bringing back the analog, maybe something akin to a radio play where you fill in the gaps, you complete the narrative, you make the links yourself. And I think that's particularly interesting to look beyond the kind of grid as a structure of restraint, yet one that we were talking about in terms of nets and lace and weaving. And that seems like something productive rather than something restraining. And I think that that's interesting. And I think for us, the idea of the table upending and becoming a kind of vertical surface rather than a horizontal one, where our making can start to play, is really important. And I suppose to think about collaboration rather than it being a digital collaboration that we are still very much involved in making. It is just that we are slightly detached from each other in terms of our proximity, yet at the same time very, very close together. And I think those kind of paradoxes are critical, really.
And also that Beckett's Unnamable.
You can't hear me, can you?
Yeah, you're breaking up, Victoria, a little bit.
The approach isn't to have a scholarly understanding of the Beckett text, it's more to use
A little
it.
bit. I just wanted to say that I've been doing this.
It's very Beckett, actually, isn't there, to kind of have that pause in a sense.
And the not knowing in Beckett, and it being a terrifying thing to engage oneself in, the fear of something going wrong, the fear of it not being interesting, the fear of nobody listening, of speaking into a void as we could be. All of those are conditions of creative practice, and we wanted to ultimately to turn the screens on the rooms and the mess that we've made, because of the pressure to tidy, and the space in everyday life. There's enough pressure to clean up and to present a different version of who we are and what we do, whereas the actual chaos I'm sitting in right now is the truth, is the analog version of our life that accompanies the little boxes or the grid in which we're currently supposedly inhabiting.
Yeah, I like the fact that we're operating. I can just see in the chat box, Henry's said about how do you choose the materials you work with? Do you have agreed kit of parts?
Well, the cows came totally unaware of being part of this. They sort of appeared on as it was being formed, whereas other things like maybe sticks or tomatoes, they're part of a vocabulary. Perhaps it wouldn't be too strong to say that somehow is our analog, a little bit. It's a taste of the analog world that we might inhabit, and words and have often are always part of our material. So we think of them as kind of material.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. There are quite often not necessarily kits, but there's a kind of material understanding. And because we've been working together, you know, for a few years on those meeting points, there is synchronicity to the way that we've started to think. And you could talk about it being a particular aesthetic, but actually it's to do with maybe how those objects that we choose might yield to something that might talk about measurement or digestion or transformation, or something that combined, or something that is multiple, and gives us license to be able to extend their objecthood in a sense through conversation. So the transformative nature of the things that we choose is really important, but also that they have a domestic link. They could be recognizable. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We often have food, but or squishy things. But when you've got computers, they tend to be less as a part of the conversation. But materials matter, and words are also our materials. Is always been true. So conversation, we want our materials to be in conversation in some way, or not want, they've become elements of a conversation.
We're also putting more emphasis upon utterances as opposed to high or big events. So the art is in the conversation and the interplay between the utterances, whereas there is no high point. But I think through regular conversation over the last 2 or 3 years, there is enough openness to allow new things to emerge and accidents to happen, and failure regularly rewards. And quite often these conversations, well, pre-COVID, these conversations happened around a dinner table in which we would run off and get something if it was of interest. But it also, that very same thing could provoke further discussion, or could just end in a cul-de-sac. And I think it's important to allow that its true place in the process as part of the dialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because when we started doing this, I think not tonight, I mean, a few years ago, we really tried not to care. We thought we were a reading group. We thought we were looking at theory. And we always have looked at theory, and we've always looked at particular texts, and then we have transformed them through the material. And then what started to happen is that material started to take on a different hierarchy, or stand next to, she's carrying on, stand next to the things that we were making. And then what happened is that we published something. And then in that, we were really interested in the fact that the objects started to have a different navigation. And we were really clear that we wanted the objects and the images to be words, and maybe the words to be images. So in a sense, I think that the status of everything is up for grabs. It's sort of nothing and something simultaneously. And when we have our evenings, and even after these Zoom meetings that we've had during lockdown, the detritus backstage of the stuff that we create is like, it's like a kind of, I don't know, like something's gone off, a bomb of objects. But it's almost like that's enabled some very small navigation or material exploration to happen. And as Karl said earlier, that is what practice is, the unknown bit of that thinking. And it's not about the product, but it's about getting to a particular point. So I think all the materials are in flux, I think.
I'd just like to add something to that, in that I was talking to Victoria earlier about our kitchen, or Victoria's kitchen, or other room in our house, and what the 4-panel video screen has done is, I feel it's more about image making, digital image making, because we would be sat amongst these, and our kitchen, or the furniture of the kitchen or the table would come into it, whereas what we've ended up doing is created a 4-panel thing in which we feature less and the environment features less. And so we've become mindful of the joins, even though ideally I'd want to look back before commenting on it, because I genuinely don't know. I was in my own world and I'm not entirely sure what happened. But I think there was some, we did set it up so that there were some formal components, so colour or shape, or the motif of the cow or the grid, but everything else happens in a way that it didn't happen earlier. And I think part of it is about accepting that, but maybe the digital, there's a new set of skills emerging in relation to that, and we wouldn't have normally taken on a creative text like Beckett's text. We would normally be talking about new materialism. I found it really liberating, because we just dipped in wherever we fancied, and quite often at random points.
But was it funny? Because I thought when there were certain bits where I would see somebody doing something, and it's quite interesting to be in something, participate and observe. And I found myself wanting to laugh. Do you know what I mean? That it was something that mattered. It matters, but also it was really playful, and then silly, and then meaningful, and I think all of those things having a place within practice are important. I mean, I think particularly within the kind of context that we're in at the moment, and people navigating a new way to practice, a new way to share, or questioning the way that those things are shared, I think is kind of critical. But also I think we're really interested for pedagogically for the people that we might work with, that not to see this as not to see this kind of online experience as something that has to negate materiality or negate mess, but actually the kind of embodiedness of it is still very much there and kind of important.
Also, I think the realization from a colleague at work that once you plug another camera in that's mobile, mine's on the end of a lead, but as soon as you can do that, you can do more things. And I think it's not accepting the Zoom, the hardware of the computer, or the Zoom software itself. It's not taking it at face value and just thinking, hold on, what else can we do? And we had to put a fourth screen in just to balance the images, and that was just an old HD, non-HD video camera. But I don't know if it came across, but the other day it looked like an installation by Miroslav Balka because of the darkness and fuzziness of it, and it added some kind of menace to it, and that wasn't intended at all.
I thought about Louise Bourgeois, actually, when you mentioned Balka. There was a kind of bourgeois cage kind of.
Yeah.
Have become more central. So we've always ended up in a bit of a mess. But something kind of we've always sort of celebrated, I think, at the end of something. And this time we had a little bit more staging. So we could only be surprised and surprise you in nuanced kind of ways, and in little bits that demonstrated that there was still spontaneity and blur at the edges, or of our screen worlds, and just coming back to the grid and the mess. Karl and I were talking earlier today about the idea of the text as a textile, as a net, and how the kind of net can get finer and finer and finer until it kind of is so fine that we've lost touch with it, and it's somehow wanting to lose a sense of where we are, even whilst we're framed by this technology and system and gridness.
Also, I think.
Could I just add something from outside the grid? I didn't want to make my video visible and confuse the perfect 2x2. I also think there's a thing with the grid and sound which is very interesting, which is it's very strange for me at home. The next door have decided to redevelop the shop down below, so that they're currently smashing the wall out and through. And there's these huge thuds, and it's going on at the same time as you're moving your windows and walls around. It feels quite relevant. But it made me think that there's this, because what you were showing on Zoom as you did the piece was not the thing that was making noise normally. You suddenly realise that noise on a grid becomes unanimous, because you can't tell necessarily where it's coming from. So
Yeah.
that technically blurs the boundaries more than I had realised. If you don't show yourself speaking, anyone could speak.
Yeah.
I think it's quite
There's
nice.
a significant advantage in there, and I think that's the spirit we'd probably like to approach everything in. Is that okay? You've made that comment. I think that's a really interesting one, and maybe that's in terms of practice, that's something we can take forward and build. We'll build in. We'll build on. The other thing I just wanted to add was that the thing that it stopped us doing is eating.
Yeah.
Because eating has been quite an important thing, and in the paper we talked about the importance of the digestive tract of knowing, and about digestion of knowledge, and about chewing. We talked about the idea of a bolus, so the idea of materiality mashed up enough to get it down your throat, and then for it to be to begin to be eroded. And so normally we would be drinking and eating, and there isn't the opportunity. The way we set up the structure, you can't do it. And the other thing is that we always draw, and we'd planned to draw, and I don't know what happened. It just didn't happen. But the idea of making a mark, and a mark telling its own story of its own becoming, I think is really interesting. But maybe I think from my perspective, it's that I'm a little bit prissy about the background because I want to keep it, and maybe that's affected my thinking. Maybe I just need to ditch that approach.
Yeah, but I think it's also interesting that you could say, oh, we weren't drawing, but I think that through some of the other things that we've done before, what we always say afterwards, but what is it? And we end up with thousands of images, and we've had this debate all the way through about what the images are in terms of relationship to the objects and in terms of the event. And we've talked about filming it, we've talked about the sound, and we talked about the narration and our conversation. And actually, through a series of books or kind of journals that we made to look at the output that we had, they're very painterly. And so I started to look at it tonight thinking that they were paintings. And I'd be interested afterwards to see the screenshots, which is what we've done before, the screenshots of the images, because that's when you start to be able to see it rather than being in the middle of it. So in a sense, yeah, we're not drawing in a traditional sense, but I would say that there is a drawing that is happening, or a kind of painterly aspect to the way that the marks are made on the screen or within our spaces.
You know that poem, when the caged bird sings, only the caged bird sings, Walker. So it's only the bird that's caged that knows how to sing. If you see what I mean, because you don't have, well, it's complicated, but it's that idea of a freedom that being caged enables. A theatre of operations, but it's one which allows for freedoms to emerge that you didn't know you had, that you didn't know existed, which is the thrill. And I have to say that we've done a few tests and watched the videos, and it's a totally different thing to looking at photographs, and there it is quite fun. The things happen that you didn't know were happening, and it's a very exciting, it's a richer tapestry in a sense than can ever than a photograph in some respects, which is nice.
Joanna Conway has just said, I couldn't help joining in, like Henry's noise. I have my computer on a yellow box. I wrote 3 pages of words as they came to me whilst watching the performances.
Lovely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's nice, and it is that kind of idea of I don't know, allowing ourselves or giving ourselves license, isn't it, to be playful and allow that kind of intuitive responsiveness to kind of take place when something else is happening. And that's all we're doing. So it is joining in, Joe. I mean, it is joining in, and I think that's what's kind of interesting for us, and where it kind of came from in the first place. And we thought that we were doing something that was freed up from the rest of our kind of intense practices that we have, but in a sense you start making it matter more and more, or caring more and more.
Actually, we lost an idea along the way, which was we were going to invite you all as participants to select something from your immediate vicinity at the very out, and to sort of hold on to it, or to and then kind of come back at it at the end, as if knowing it for the first time. But we somehow lost that along the way. But it's lovely to hear your response, because it kind of makes sense of each of us in our little complex worlds, and you know, as if we're all doing this, in fact, not just the three of us.
Yeah.
As if our realities are made of this.
Yeah.
As if it's a world in miniature. And there's a lovely quotation that Karl read about the world. If I can find it. But you read it, you might remember. Oh, being locked up in something, a little world. It isn't certain. The other thing we haven't really talked about, which is, I think, interesting, is the way, well, perhaps Karl's brilliant at talking about this, but the way that Beckett, nothing is certain, everything is unstable. It's kind of, is it, isn't it? The whole way through The Unnamable. And the title is interesting, that things can't be named, that they lose. Really, we should never have had cows. They should lose their identity almost.
Well, I think the cows became horses, didn't they? And the cows were very many different animals in the end.
Yeah. Is it a goat? Yeah. And the doggy in the window.
Yeah.
I did worry about battery farming.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, the idea of our worlds being processed through repetition. We were against that in a way. We were against Rosalind Krauss's kind of insistence on the modernity of the grid, which doesn't resist change. We kind of wanted Krauss in there somehow, but at the same time we were resisting kind of her insistence on framing at the expense of everything else.
Yeah.
And I think if we're going to end, there's one thing I think I personally would like to end on, and it's around the idea of the relationship between, I'm not fond of binaries, but how one takes the creative process and makes it palatable, or makes it slightly more than a so what experience, is quite an interesting challenge, because it needs to have, so the chance procedures allow newness and change and difference. They're more akin to heterotopic space, the development of heterotopic spaces. But at the same time, there's always, it's like the relationship between knowing and not knowing. You can't have one without the other. And so in the freedom of the creative act, there inevitably has to be enough balance between control and freedom. And it's a very delicate tightrope to walk. And so one of the things I think perhaps we might end up writing about or pushing further is how that balance is struck, and what is, how do we do it well?
I don't think we've got to the end of this yet, because when Kimberly was saying about how we were moving from the table to a kind of a sort of almost a staging, I realized that I've been doing all this on a glass table through which I can see, and how the glass table is kind of both, we might there are things that we haven't yet got to the bottom of.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting if we're ever together again. Whether, you know, what that table can be, like you're saying, the glass table becoming the screen, and the possibility of that, the upending of things, I think is really kind of exciting. But but we're not being limited by where we are and our circumstance, and I think that's the most important thing. Are we happy that are we done?
Yeah.
Joanna says something about a dog's tongue.
Yeah,
I
and can't see. Yeah, it's probably that one in your
Good.
Karl, in your window, that dog. Where is it? Yeah. Lovely.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for doing that and explaining it afterwards and the introduction. It was really good to hear you talk about it. Thank you to everyone for tuning in and for those questions and comments. I forwarded them all to, you probably see them on the screen as well. Just a couple of notes of things we have coming up on Assembly Online. Next event in 2 weeks on October the 1st is with Sarah Lowndes, returning for the third part of her series with Chris Burden and Topanga Canyon, reading chapters from her book Artists Working Outside the City. And then after that we have, on the 15th, we have the 4th International Poetry Reading hosted by Kai Draper. October the 29th is Jess Fernie, who will be doing an event talking about the Archive of Destruction that she was hoping to launch this year. And November the 12th is an Oven By event yet to be announced. November the 26th is Original Projects. So loads of stuff coming up. And just following on with Joanne Conaway and Nell Cruz both saying thank you in the chat. So thanks again for being involved.
Thank you very much. Lovely to hear your questions, even though we couldn't always see you, but to know you're all there. And keep the conversation going. Thank you.
James, lovely.
Thanks, Henry.
Lovely closing comment from James Epps saying, thank you, look forward to the version with 9 cameras.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.